Let's begin with the before lecture chant. An unsurpassed, penetrating, and perfect Dharma is rarely met with, even in 100,000 million kalpas, having it to see and listen to remember and accept. I vow to taste the truth of the Tathagata's words. Good morning, everybody. So I have a few stories that I want to share with you this morning. On the very first day of the Upaya Zen Center chaplaincy program, which I was a part, Roshi Joan Halifax shared this story that I want to share with you today. And it's a story about Martin of Tours, T-O-U-R-S, very famous city in France. He later became Saint Martin. But the story goes that as a very young 18-year-old, he was enrolled in the military, and he was riding his horse down a road towards a particular city, along with his regiment. And as he rode along, this young Martin saw a beggar alongside the road, down on the ground like this. And he immediately stopped his horse. He impulsively grabbed his thick military cloak, took his sword out of its place and chopped the cloak in half. He gave half the cloak to this man to help stave off a little bit of the winter cold. And he kept the rest of the cloak for himself, the other half. Now, to be sure, this is a story of spontaneous, selfless compassion on the part of Saint Martin. That's for sure. And it's a story also that we need to see that he kept half the cloak for himself. In other words, it's important that we take care of ourselves as well as taking care of other people. And by the way, the Latin word for cloak, capa, is actually the root word for chaplaincy. And I spent a beautiful few days this past week up at our cabin. And I was talking to my cousin one day, and she said, how is it you decide on what you're going to talk about on a Sunday? And I said, well, you know, if I'm using a text, this is my process. I said, but if not, it might just be a word or a phrase that I see or that pops into my head or that someone says. It might be an image, a sound, it could be anything. It could come from anywhere. And sometimes from very unexpected and somewhat surprising places, as it did this last week. I think I've mentioned before that we're doing work in sort of migrating everything for the Zendo, for the Sangha, over into a centralized area online. And I say we, please understand mostly Kate. Thank you, Kate. I'm just helping along the way. But last week I needed to change something in our phone company internet account, SierraTel. And so I logged into the account and I was wandering around, you're figuring out what's in the website and whatnot. And I wanted to change some of the personal information because I wanted my email in there to get voicemails through email also, notifications. So I clicked on this one part of the menu, and what opened up in just a window that had these big letters at the top, self-care. And I stared at these words. I thought, well, mostly because I have never ever seen the word self-care on a menu option for any service providers that I have ever been involved with. But there it was, big letters. And I have to say that, after wandering around a bit and then finally getting into the account, finding what I needed, it was really a welcome sight. Self-care from SierraTel. our phone and internet company. And I have to admit that there just something shifted at that moment. I just kind of settled down and I thought, yeah, I need to take care of myself here. And they're giving me what I need. They're helping me do it. And just as an aside, of course, Sierratel has not only self-care option, but customer care option, which of course we would expect. And this was a story that I told my cousin about this week's talk. Just this meaningful phrase that came from an unexpected place, which served as the jumping off point for what I decided to talk about today. Something that just came alive for me. Now, this idea of taking care and self-care has done a lot of different meanings and connotations for each of us, and that changes probably regularly. Perhaps what's coming to mind is walking in the mountains, or going for a swim, or being with your grandchildren, or like the fellow I just met this morning. I was driving into the parking lot, and he was putting up a sign for his restaurant, this big lemonade sign. And I stopped and I rolled down my window and I said, hey, it's relatively new, this restaurant. And I said, how is business going for you? And he said, oh gosh, it's actually quite good. It's really good. But my wife and I, we're putting in 18, 20-hour days. We're doing a lot of catering. We are just working our tails off. And I said, because this was on my mind, I said, well, what are you doing for yourself? What are you doing to take care of yourself through this? And he said, yeah, I need Zen. And he said, let me tell you what my Zen is. I said, yeah, do, tell me. And he said, okay, we live down by the creek here in Oakhurst, and our property goes right down to the water. And he says, down in this one spot, I have placed a rag that is wrapped around a bar of soap. He said, so every day I go down to the creek and I take this and I dip it in the water, and then I move it all around in the sand until it's completely covered with sand. And then I start scrubbing every part of my body. And he said, and after I finished with that, I jump in this cold, cold water and just lie there until I'm ready to get out. I thought that is a wonderful bit of self-care. And we said our goodbyes. I came back in here, and then there was a knock on the door just a few minutes later, and he came in holding this little tiny yellow flower. And he said, I just wanted to give you this. You made my day. And I went, I said, well, you have certainly made mine. Thank you so much. And then 5 minutes later, he came back again, and he had this little packet. And he said, this is my favorite lavender. I have 4 left, and I just felt I wanted to give it to you. And I said, wonderful. I thanked him so much. And, taking care, it involves this. It involves allowing this spontaneous arousal of what we all already have, this generosity, this kindness, and allowing it to have a place to settle. And he certainly took care of me in ways, and it took care of himself too. So anything we do has the capacity, really, that we can care for ourselves and might benefit us physically, mentally, or emotionally. And Chris was one of those moments today. That's his name. But when I was thinking about this talk, what really came to my mind really quickly is that for me, on a day-to-day basis, my own self-care is really rooted in the wisdom of the Buddha and Zen practice. And I feel like once we've been touched by the Buddha's foundational teachings of the Four Noble Truths, that in my mind and heart, we are already beginning on a path which is nurturing self-care. The first truth that there is suffering is quickly followed in his teachings by there is a way to end suffering, which we know includes the Noble Eightfold Path. And the very idea of taking care of ourselves, physically, mentally, and emotionally, is inherent in these seminal teachings of the Buddha and in the Dharma in general. And when we take our first steps on this path, we embark on this journey of mindfulness and meditation, of paying attention and tending to our own pain and joy and habits and wounds and intentions and vulnerabilities. And we're encouraged to bring compassionate, wonderful gazing towards ourselves, to learn about ourselves, to self-assess, really, and just to keep opening wider and wider to life as it is in the present moment. And in doing so, we create a little more space over time for some of the practices of self-care that the path offers, some of which we've talked about in the last two books that we've been studying together. Another story. A few years after my first experience of Zen meditation with my root teacher, Grace Shearson, I joined the 2-year SPOT program, which is the Shogaku Priest Ongoing Training Program, whose intention was to supplement and support traditional priest training methods with new ones that embodied Suzuki Roshi's vision of finding our practice here in our own Western culture. So this was really a rich learning environment, especially for me. I was relatively new lay Zen practitioner. Our teachers, our senseis, and the founding members were Grace, Lou Richmond, who is a priest in the Bay Area with the Sangha, Steve Stuckey, some of you might know, who at the time was the abbot of San Francisco Zen Center, and Darlene Cohen, who also was a teacher and had Sangha up in Northern California. And in this group, we met every 2 to 3 months for about a weekend at a time. And it was after the first 3 or 4 weekends that we had gathered that I suffered a neck injury that was really pretty severe in terms of pain if it got triggered. And one weekend during SPOT, I spoke to Grace about just how painful this was on the cushion. And that on the cushion, all I could really think of was the pain. And she asked me what I was doing for self-care. And I didn't have much to say except that I was icing it and, when possible, trying to figure out how to set the pillows so I could stay still and, things like that. And she listened to me, and then she offered a healing practice that she uses herself, which is imagining a bright, warm, healing light and bringing that light to right into the place in my body that's hurting, right down into a cellular level, and meditating on that. And I did that. And I have to say, it was a really good practice, but I was still struggling. And at the beginning of the next day, it was announced that Darlene was offering an hour of her time to the subject of living with pain. Synchronicity, for sure. And if you've ever met Darlene, you'll not have forgotten her exuberance for life, her laughter, her humor, and her deep personal teachings and practice, which was so informed by the severe pain and actually crippling of rheumatoid arthritis that she suffered from for about 26 years before she died. And she says she had to surrender to this debilitating condition, and she really had no choice. And at the beginning, she was really feeling nothing but the pain. But every day, she took a torturous walk, very painful walk, only about a half a block from her home to San Francisco Zen Center, because she wanted to have lunch and hang out with other people. It was important to her. In fact, this short walk really was a monumental task for her. she compared it to running a marathon. However, she had spent many years meditating and had much practice in noticing her thoughts and her feelings and her perceptions. And the practice was, in fact, the very care she could give to herself. She writes that, fully inhabiting, and I quote her, fully inhabiting my body, despite its devastation, attentive to every little sensation, allowed me to pay close attention to its latent possibilities when they appeared. And let me give you her example. One day on the walk to San Francisco Zen Center, as she took each painful step, she wondered why a step was just so painful and focused on what to her was a step, her foot touching the pavement. That was a step, the most stressful part of the step. But she also noticed something else. She noticed her foot when it was in the air. And she discovered that when she focused on the foot in the air, rather than the foot striking the pavement, her stamina greatly increased. And after this moment of discovery, she said that she never again failed to climb the steps to knock on the door, the front door of Zen Center. Changing the focus of her attention changed her physical ability. And this was part of Darlene's gift to us that day at Emptiness Zendo, teaching us how to focus on other parts of our body. In my case, injury here, focusing on the muscles on the right-hand side of my neck and how much they were working to keep my head straight so that it didn't cause me more pain. Focusing on the vital warmth blood that was coming into that area and nourishing those muscles. And our practice of meditation and awakening to all experiences, painful or not, opens us to this rich tapestry of our lives, with nothing excluded. And this is part of the taking care of our bodies and our minds and our hearts. Of course, our practice nurtures not only self-care, but also our sense of interconnectedness and the care of others. Specifically, in Zen, we have the tradition of monastic life and the need to take care of not just the physical spaces of the monastery, but of course, also each other, the Sangha. And if you participated in retreats, even half-day retreats, you're familiar with the term Samu, S-A-M-U. You normally see this word interwoven into the retreat schedule. There are these periods of Samu. Often they're called work practice or work periods, they might be called. And it's usually thought of as the work we do or the work that is done to benefit the Sangha. And interestingly, Samu is also translated as caretaking practice or the practice of taking care. And in English, this might seem to you like a noun, but actually the experience of Samu, the practice in taking care, is understood as a verb because it is actually the exertion of the practice. It is what is done for others, not one's personal benefit. Traditionally, the tasks to be done come directly from the functioning, of course, of the monastery itself. And my own experience practicing in a monastery in Thailand and some other places taught me very quickly that Samu requires a coordination of everyone's activities. It requires us to go beyond our own beliefs about who we are, what we can and cannot do, why we are there. I've shared with you some of those experiences before. One of them, you might remember me having to put the white butter and jam on the white bread, and how that really irritated me. But oddly, I thought that was so unfair, but it was really me just being ego. And what Samu teaches us is that we need to leave all that behind. All that involves us being at the center, just leave that and simply do what is needed for the benefit of everyone. If we're in a monastery or in a retreat, these decisions about what is needed are often decided for us, of course. But in either case, taking care practice really involves doing what needs to be done and doing it as well and as thoroughly and as accurately as we possibly can. Bring our whole effort to the task in order to benefit everyone. And of course, we can bring that same energy to ourselves. You know, many of you have expressed how important the Sangha is to you, how just showing up and having the opportunity to sit together is something that you really love. Part of what you're feeling, I think, is this taking care practice. If you visit the Zendo in person, as you enter, you see that the flowers have been put out, the candles are lit. You may notice in the entryway that shoes have been neatly arranged to make room for other shoes, and also so that other people don't trip on your shoes. We are taking care. And during this time together on Sundays, the energy and the mindfulness of the Sangha here in the Zendo and online supports us as we support it by participating and taking care in even small ways that we can, even just showing up. You know, the Sangha was crucial to the Buddha. Upon his enlightenment, it's said that the first thing he did was to start building a Sangha. Even an awakened one needs a Sangha, let alone those of us who are not fully yet Buddhas. Our Sangha is our refuge. It's a place of taking care of ourselves and taking care of others. And when we chant Sangam Saranam Gacchami, I take refuge in Buddha and in Sangha, it isn't just a proclamation of our faith, but also one of deeply taking care.